Hi, I'm Charlie Redner. Welcome to the Right Now Show.
And I'm Judy Saxon, and this is a program where we put the emphasis on writers, writing, and the arts. Hi, Charlie.
Hi, how you doing this morning, Judy?
Well, just great. You know, one of the things I love about co-hosting this program is I learn so much. And
Yes.
speaking of that, oh, have I been learning more? Our guest today is Judy Mundell, and she has written a wonderful book called The Block Manager, a true story of love in the midst of Japanese American internment camps. Wonderful reviews.
Wow.
So I'm looking forward to talking with Judy. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Judy grew up listening to the best storyteller, her grandfather, and she's carried on that legacy, as evidenced in the book telling us Janet's story. Judy is also a certified public accountant. She graduated from Indiana University with a BS degree in business administration with a concentration in accounting. She has, for the last 30 years, she's been a CFO in several small businesses, and she's taught accounting classes. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you. It's
Hi,
such
Judy.
a here. And to be with both of you, and I'm very touched and honored to be a guest on your show. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Well,
we're familiar with the topic because we interviewed the author of On the Hotel of Goner and Sweet and Bitter and Sweet, and we've got very much interested in the topic that obviously drew you into writing a book.
Tell us a little bit, Judy, about how about the storyline and how it came about.
Would you like to know a little bit of the history of Janamy?
Sure.
We'll get to that.
Oh, we'll get to that. Okay. So the storyline, it starts out in the book with Jan in high school, basically. And I guess I need to tell you up front, in the book, she's Janet. To me, she's Jan or Janny. We changed the names. The publisher decided that it was the prudent thing to do since there were so many family members associated with Jan. So we did change the names a bit, but hers we moved to Janet. So, and she doesn't mind being recognized for her real name, Janice or Jan. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of clarify that. But so having said that, she had a very normal life living in Stockton, California, which is, I guess, about 75 miles to the east of San Francisco. It's a very active area in agriculture, and her father was a farmer there, and he was very lucky in that he got a job as a foreman for a local farmer, which meant they had a little bit more than a lot of other people, but she would still have classified herself as poor. She thought of herself as being very poor growing up, but they had plenty to eat. They had an apartment in town. She was the oldest of 8 children, and her life was very normal. And then on December 7, 1941, we had Pearl Harbor, and her life changed in an absolute instant, absolute overnight. She lost her job. All of her friends lost their jobs. Their friends became their enemies. No one would speak to them except for a few loyal friends over, but the vast majority, they became outcasts in their own hometown. And it was stunning. The switch was immediate. So from December 7th, then you get into 1942, and you have the presidential executive orders come out that authorize setting up the camps. That's another whole story. There's backstory on everything. there's anything that intrigues you. I've got backstory on stuff. So I did a lot of my own research when I was working on the book. But anyway, so the first order was for up in Washington State for, I think it was Bainbridge Island, for the all Japanese people, 1/16 or more, were to be moved to a camp. And basically what the government did was initially they set up the WCCA, which was the Wartime Civilian Control Association, I think something like that. But the initial order was, we got to get all these people confined immediately. And so they went in, typically they found local facilities and just adapted as possible. Throwing up barracks, using, untreated wood and concrete that was, thinly poured, nothing was done according to good standards. And they threw up these barracks and they started getting these people moved out because they were petrified that there were traitors in the midst.
Right. Let me stop you there for a minute before
Sure.
we go on to the story. I just want to backtrack a little bit. I wanted to backtrack a little bit and ask you about your own writing experience, because taking on a project like this with such a sacred topic, basically, you have to be a little intrepidated about what's going to happen here. Am I good enough to do this? Did you have those thoughts in your head?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to tell you a little bit about me, as you know, my background was more in numbers, not writing, but
right.
As Judy explained, I am a storyteller. I get accused of that all the time. So I actually had a cousin who was a very famous author. His name is Richard Peck, actually deceased now, but he won the Newbery. He was a young adult author who's written dozens of books. He's literally worldwide. All children in the schools today read his books. He's that well known.
Wow.
So I got in touch with him and I explained to him my project and what I was thinking about. And he helped me in two very big ways. The first was he told me to write it first person.
Yes.
I started off not intending to write it first person. And he said, oh, no, you need to write this first person. And that was a huge help for me.
Yes.
The second thing that he really helped me with was I was struggling with, who are you to be doing this? And I was struggling with, am I good enough? And I got to get it right. And I had a lot of feelings of insecurity. And a friend of a friend connected me with a niece of Jan's, and I was so excited to meet her. And after emailing, I should say the end of this story is I have not met her, and we have a great relationship. But at that moment, we didn't. And she wrote to me and she said, do you know how many times my aunt has been interviewed? And what are you doing? And she really did not give me any kind of encouragement. And Jan's son, who initially I've known for many, many years, and initially he was in favor of the project. And then all of a sudden, I started getting the cold shoulder from him too.
Oh.
And so it was difficult to proceed, if you can understand.
Oh, yes.
So
now you met Janet in work, right? So you had her working, you knew her very well. And when she had the confidence to ask you to continue that project, you just went on with it, right?
Right. Well, to back up just a second. So the second thing that Richard Peck did to really help me when I shared these stories with him, he said, Judy, stop. And he said, don't ever forget, she chose you.
Oh, yes.
And it was a moment for me. It was really a moment. And because what basically happened was I took her out to lunch for her birthday.
You worked together, the two of you worked together. Yes.
Mm-hmm. We were all work friends, but we'd just been friends for a long time. I drove her back and forth to work because at that time in her 50s, she had never gotten a driver's license.
Ah.
And you know how you get to know somebody when you ride in the car together.
Sure.
And then it just never occurred to us that we shouldn't be friends. I'm 5 years older than her. I mean, she's 35 years older than me. And it just, I mean, we were just friends. She enjoyed hearing college stories. And honestly, I always loved history. And the more I started hearing about World War II and her story, I was so enthralled. I mean,
Right.
the big points in that book I've known for 40 years.
Yes.
And you started to say, I think I interrupted, you were going out to lunch with her?
Yes, and it was her 95th birthday. And she started laughing because I had actually, I think I give myself a little credit for this. I had actually talked her into getting her driver's license. So at age 60, she got her first driver's license.
Oh, good for her.
And it was a good thing because her husband, about a dozen years later, she lost her husband. So she continued to live in her home for another 20 some years. And you know, she was a fine driver. But anyway, she was 95 and she went to renew her license. And the clerk said, "I'll see you in 3 years." And she started laughing. She said, "Do you know how old I am?" And when we were sitting at lunch with this discussion, and it hadn't even like occurred to me that she really was 95 at that moment. Do you know what I'm saying? Because she was so in great shape, but she was so vital. Yes. And so I just looked at her and I said, "Jan, we got to get your story down. We've got to do this." And I said, "I feel qualified, but I'd love to try." And you know what she said? She said, "Wee!"
Let me ask you how you went about that. Did you actually tape record? You go over her house? You do telephone interviews? Did you take copious notes? How did you proceed?
Sort of all the above. So that was in January of 2015. And I spent the entire year interviewing her every chance I could. Keep in mind, I was working still.
Oh.
And so she, you know, believe it or not, kind of had a busy schedule. I mean, she had little classes she would go to, and she you know, she actually had a pretty active life at 95. And so whenever I could, we'd get together, and I had many recordings on my phone, and I took a lot of notes. And as you can imagine, when you talk with somebody, you don't just go chronologically. We were all over.
Of course.
And so it was a massive project to organize. Well, that December, so literally about a year later, I was at the airport heading out on a family trip. I plugged my phone in to charge it at the airport, and I think there was a power surge, and my phone got destroyed. I sent it off to different labs. I tried everything, and it was all fried.
Oh,
all those interviews. But I had it up here. I had notes that I had taken by hand, and I just had to let it go and move on. And so
that had to hurt so bad. I can imagine. I did telephone interviews and recorded on my phone, but I immediately went and transcribed them myself. I didn't even ask for assistance because I wanted to transcribe them so I knew, you know, the tone and everything that when they were being spoken to me.
Exactly.
Wow.
Oh,
it was a tough moment, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So pretty much all of 2016, I spent working on my rough draft in all my spare time. I was like, you know, several hours every day working on it. And so I, and I, like I say, I was doing a lot of my own independent research. And so I just had notebooks, you know, big notebooks full, and, you know, of the independent research I was doing. And here's like one little silly example I'll tell you, that I had so many of these moments that it's hard to even describe. So I read somewhere about how when they moved these Japanese around after the initial camp, you know, they put them in permanent camps and they're moving them all over the place, that they didn't want any Caucasian people to see these Japanese even riding through their communities.
Right.
But tell them to leave the shades pulled, that they were going through military zones. Okay. So I read this on my own. And when I went and asked Jan about that, she had no idea. to this very day, she believed them that they were going through military zones.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Wow.
It was like stunning what I would come across and then review with her. And
You know what I'd like you to do, Judy?
Sure.
On page 85, 84, I think it is, you copied a letter that was written, I guess that came from a girlfriend of, we'll call her Janet, about how she was treated before they actually got sent away. Can you read that little letter to
Sure.
us?
This letter was from one of her close friends, right?
Right.
Janet was
and this was her close girlfriend that was Caucasian.
Mm-hmm.
right.
And that she had met in school. She had helped her a lot with her school projects. I am sorry I treated you like I did. My dad's rage at the Japanese made me irrational. I was scared to cross him when he told me to never speak to you again. I knew it was wrong. I hope you will forgive me. You will always be a special friend in my heart. I never could have made straight A's at Stockton High without your help over and over again. Will you consider being my friend again? You can't write me back now, but sometime. I will find a way that we can write each other if that is. I needed to send you this now. You've been treated terribly, Janet, and it makes me sad to think of what I did. Please know I think of you often and hope you are okay. Your friend Marie.
Oh, that's so touching.
Wow.
Oh.
Yeah.
She had to.
Judy Saxon, what do you think of that letter?
I get all teary just listening. Of course I read the book, but just hearing it again. I mean, they lost so much. I mean, and even that friend. And what I didn't think about, because I'm learning so much, they had to give up their pets. I'm such an animal lover.
Oh,
you don't even think about
you and me
that.
both. You and me both.
Me too.
Yes,
Yeah.
Charlie too.
Yeah.
And they had all they could
Yeah.
live with was what they could carry. That's
Yeah.
all they could take with them.
And they were petrified. If they took him to the pound, they just put him down. And it was terrible.
Oh
It
yeah.
was terrible.
So they couldn't.
And I know, just
Oh.
yeah.
So you told us about the train ride all the way across the country from California to Arkansas was where her camp was, as far away as you could get. I think they were all west of the Mississippi, but hers was right on the river practically.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And then when they got to the camp, she became what? The only female camp that she was called the block manager, that she ended up being the only female because basically the Japanese society was male, obviously.
Well, she spoke English and Japanese.
Yes, it was very, very male chauvinistic, as you're saying, in their culture. And actually, her first assignment as block manager was in that short-term camp that she was in Stockton.
Right.
And then when she transferred down, yes, she still was in that role, and a role she didn't want.
A terrible job. I mean, you have to kind of almost be a tattletale. I mean, you have to check on everybody, and if there's anything, what did they tell her to solve if there were any disputes or whatever, to try and take care of it herself, but if not, report back or something. Well, tell us more about the job.
Well, the funny part about that is she never turned anybody in.
My kind of boss.
Yeah, which didn't surprise me at all. But the interesting thing about Jan, I have to tell you, is she is so, how shall I say it, not sharing, not feeling any bitterness whatsoever. And when you interview her, she almost errs on the side of it wasn't that bad type thing. Do you know what I'm saying? You couldn't get her to say anything bad about anyone. Sure, there were guards that were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that there was a lot of things that were awful, but she got it. So she just, to her, the camp experience was horrible. As you said, they lost everything, their pets, their lives, their homes, all their possessions, their friends, everything. But, you know, for her, she looks at the Nazis and says, nobody hurt us. And that's kind of her perspective, that we had food to eat, nobody hurt us. And that's why, to her, there's nothing to be bitter about. It was just the war.
What an attitude. Tremendous attitude. Wow. Well, so
Yeah.
she turns like 20, 21, and then a young man is pursuing her in one of the camps. What happens?
Well, that is kind of a cute story because he was obviously smitten with her, and she was oblivious at first. And when they're riding on the train together, and he sits down every next to her every time she gets the opportunity, and they're chatting, and then once they arrive in their new camp, there's really not much to do except walk around the grounds. So that was kind of what they did. They walked around the grounds all the time, and she thought of him as a friend. She really had never dated, so she wasn't all that familiar with courting, and in their culture, literally all of their parents had arranged marriages.
Yeah,
So-
that 1940s, they were still doing that, right?
Oh yeah, and that's another whole interesting story about how these Japanese men sent away for brides in Japan. But anyway, so she wasn't real sure how she was going to find her husband. And then out of the blue, he just proposes to her. She had absolutely no idea it was coming.
So she turned him down the first time, yes?
Yes, only because her mom and dad said they weren't a good match. And her parents said, he comes from wealth. You're a poor girl. You will never fit in. And so she just, it
Well,
wasn't.
did she feel that it was the fact that, Nishi versus Isi, and she was, Japanese born versus American born? That was the big issue,
Well,
cultural issue?
he actually was born in America, but raised in Japan. So
Right.
technically an American citizen. But yeah, he was definitely pro-Japan, and that
Mhm.
I don't think it was so much his identification with Japan as it was the socioeconomic thing.
Ah,
That you won't know how to dress or act or anything else.
Mhm.
Over to Japan, it's going to be plainly obvious to everyone that you're just
Wow.
a little girl. And that's why she turned him down.
But they did eventually get married in the camp, had a
Yes, he
ceremony.
wouldn't give up.
And Judy, you're such a wonderful writer, and the love for her just comes through so clearly. He so
Yeah.
dearly loved her.
He did all his life. I would drive in the driveway with her, and if he was home ahead of us or something, and he'd be standing there with the biggest grin.
Oh.
Hi, my love. And oh yeah, that's absolutely the case.
Oh.
His entire life. She even joked with me one time. She said, yeah, she says, I really never had to worry about him running around.
So they spent 3 years in that camp, then eventually they had to be moved from that camp to another camp, northern
Not quite that
California?
long. Not quite
No?
that long. It actually was only about a year or less, because that's when they came out with the government. I don't know what they were thinking with this big survey, a loyalty survey.
Oh, yes.
And there were two questions on there that were the biggies. Are you willing to serve in the United States military? Are you loyal to America? And Jan's husband answered no on both of those, whereas her brother and her father answered yes. And so people that answered no and no became known as the no-nos.
Right.
And decided that they were disloyal and they needed to be segregated. So it wasn't bad enough that they were even in a camp. They had to all go to a special camp.
Right.
So when they all were sent to Tule Lake in Northern California.
So she had to go because her husband would say no, and she had to go with him.
Well, she made it.
She didn't have to go,
Okay.
but he insisted that she go with her because she was pregnant at the time that
pregnant, right then.
but he, he was very insistent that she go with him, so she did.
Oh, and then the having the baby there. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Luckily, the doctor was very experienced in delivering babies, but they didn't have an incubator there, and I think they needed one, so they put the baby in an oven instead of an incubator.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And
Now I understand that she was the block manager, but she was an assistant block manager when she got to California for a little while. Is that right?
actually, that
Until the
was
guy,
in Arkansas. Yeah, until she took over. Once she got to Tule Lake, she was no longer a block manager.
no,
That I
that
think
was
that
the all male dominated camp.
yes, and that was really run very intensely. They even had security around the office.
Wow.
You know, so it was a very intense type of camp. Whereas she would tell you that the one in Arkansas was much more lighthearted, and you know, the kids had ball games and that type thing.
They
And
kept calling them internment camps because that's what they were, really, weren't they?
yes,
They were
yes,
prisoners. They even refer to themselves as prisoners
And they
sometimes.
and they would choose locations that were in the middle of nowhere.
well, the government built these permanent camps principally on land that they got through foreclosures in the Depression.
Oh.
And so they had the land, and so they just went out and at least that's the ones in Arkansas. That was for forfeited land.
Yeah.
Oh, but some of them were just like in the middle of, there was nothing around.
Right, right.
Yeah, I passed one in Colorado years ago, and I'm very disappointed I didn't take the time to go tour it. There was a sign saying you could go and visit the camp. And
You know, the funny thing about that is there's a couple of I was actually working in Northern California, and I was going to go visit Tule Lake. It's got quite a bit there.
Mm-hmm.
Jan didn't want me to go, so I didn't go.
Who didn't want you to go?
Jan did not want me
Really?
to. She did not like the way that it has been preserved.
Oh,
Oh.
She did not feel that it was representative. She has been back, and there are quite a few stories that they have at the National Park Service about what happened to the Japanese in these camps, specifically Tule Lake. And Jan felt it was not representative of her and the majority of the people. In other words, they're talking about how these Japanese, they talked about them going back to their Aboriginal lives, and how they were all superstitious, and they were, you know, seeing balls of fire and that type of thing. And she said, I didn't see any of that.
Oh.
And so she didn't feel that it was a representative of what her experience was. So I didn't go.
got it.
Ah, okay.
So she survived the whole experience, her and her husband and her new baby in the camp. And then what happens? The war ends.
Oh, no, he gets sent to another camp.
Oh, that's right. He did, didn't he?
Yeah.
Because he was so bad.
Yeah. Well, you know, they kind of formed, you know, they call them gangs, but he would have said they were just like clubs or something. When you put all these no-nos together, they were all very angry at America, and so they had their little gangs going, and they were marching through camp. They really had no weapons. They were harmless.
Yeah.
But they got on the wrong side.
So what camp did he go to? What was it? Do you remember?
He went down to Santa Fe, New Mexico. It wasn't actually part of the internment camp system. They were transferred to the Immigration and Naturalization Service. So this was more like a real prison.
Oh.
It must have been, yeah, but there's no real camp there in New Mexico, right?
Yeah, there's I guess like a little boulder that's got a sign on it somewhere. But the whole deal with those people was, as soon as the war ended, they would be on the first boat back to Japan.
Yeah. Well, she was then by herself with a baby and still in that Northern California camp. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
What a struggle she must have had.
Exactly.
And then he got sent back to Japan.
Right. Right after the war, then he thought he could go back and at least see Jan and pick her up and everything, but no, they immediately were sent away. And so the really gut-wrenching part of the whole experience for Jan, the entire whole being taken away, everything, was the decision to stay or go to Japan.
Now there's where you can read the next excerpt I'd like you to read is on page
Okay.
190.
All right.
And that explains what her mother feels about this decision she has to
And the
make.
mother and the rest of the family were still in Arkansas. Isn't
Yes.
that-
Yes.
Yeah.
They were
Right.
about ready to depart on their own. Yeah. It is only because I love you so much that I plead with you to stay in America. You are an American. If you go to Japan now, you will be hated. You will still be the enemy. I grew up in Japan. I know the people. Even though you had nothing to do with the war, they will despise you, and you will face the added problem of not knowing the ways of Ray's class. He is wrong to ask you to enter this impossible situation. He should know what to expect. He is only being selfish to ask you to bear this burden. Come and stay with us wherever we settle. There will always be room for you and Norman.
Wow.
Norman
And,
is the son. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. In some of my book clubs, we end up talking quite a bit about Jan's mom because she
Mhm.
was quite a heroine.
Oh, yes.
And Jan wanted nothing more than to be just like her mom. And she always wanted the best for her family. And
Yeah.
everything that she said to Jan in that letter proved out to be true.
Yes, it did, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit because this was the shocking part. And a lot of these stories end with the end of the war and being released back into American society. But he lived, what, 7 or 8 miles from
Right,
Hiroshima?
right.
And that's where they ended up. Tell us what happened when they got there.
So their house, because he had, I guess what we would call a mansion, a very, very fine home, it did not fall from the bomb, but all the windows were blown out. And many of the houses around there, if they didn't fall down, they were shaken so badly that they needed to be torn down. And so when they arrive in Japan, Ray had sort of made peace with the military, and he was being paid to do translation work for them.
In Tokyo, probably, right?
Yeah, in Tokyo.
Mhm.
So he thought nothing of sending Jan and his son. He had a friend that was taking the train back, that he could accompany them back, and she would be at his family home until he arrived.
Can we digress just for a second?
Sure.
Talk about that terrible boat ride. I mean, on the ship when she went to Japan to meet Ray. Oh my goodness. Oh,
I know. Isn't that something? It was rough seas. It was wintertime. The seas were high, and she was literally nauseated the whole ride. And it was something, wasn't it? And
we have bunk beds 5 in a row or something.
there are hammocks, actually.
Hammocks.
Yeah.
Yes, that was. Oh, yes.
And that probably actually helped her at nighttime when she was on that hammock. Just getting
Yeah.
But yeah, and it was just, all the snoring,
Yes.
full of people, and I know
Being sick and having a baby. Oh my goodness. Well,
Yeah.
I was going to mention how bad the train ride was from Tokyo down to her home. Wasn't that rough?
Oh, yes. Yes, they oversold the trains, and so everybody was just packed in there like sardines, and
Mhm.
and the baby and his friend Chuji were sitting on the floor and just leaning up against the side of a seat, and these men came in selling. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. These Korean men came in selling rice for like a very, very high price. And people are yelling, "Get out of here," so forth. So all these people, they want to go to the next carriage. And how do they get there? There's no way to get through. So they just started walking on people's heads.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Incredible story.
I know. I just can't imagine.
So
And
when she gets to her husband's home, apparently the reception wasn't what she had hoped for, perhaps, and her mother was being,
It was
gave her advance warning.
right. Well, and you had the not only the problem that she was an American, but his sister had never gotten along. He and his sister had never gotten along anyway. So she was absolutely, treated like scum.
Mm.
And the sister, basically starved her. And she didn't have much. Of course, they were all running out of food. But what it seemed like that all they had was a truck had come by and given everybody a sack of sweet potatoes.
Mhm.
And
But she hid those from her, didn't she?
she hid them. Yeah, she had a trap door in the dining room. Yeah, yeah. And I've known that story for 40 years. How she peeked in there and saw those sweet potatoes and didn't dare touch them. And the neighbor then left her a sweet potato every day. That's
Yes.
how she kept going until her husband returned. But of course, he had no idea how bad it was going to be either.
No, but she went to stores and she walked the neighborhood and wasn't received as a Japanese, but as an American, right?
Right, right. People knew. And, you know, her coat thrown in the mud. She was,
Yes.
she was treated terribly. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the house that she went to, actually, it was the biggest house in the town, wasn't it? It was a mansion.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. But
Yeah. I mean, that was a very low point in her life. She really wondered if she was going to survive. There's no doubt about that.
well, and she became so weak that she was literally crawling.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Because
Then I think we should read that third excerpt at this time
Okay.
because it's so moving and so appropriate. You have the page number. I think it's page 232.
Yes. So this was when Jan, she didn't want to worry her mom and dad, but also she felt she needed to tell them what was going on. And so she mustered the strength to send this letter. In case I don't survive, I want you to know how much I have appreciated having the best parents any daughter could have. You put us kids first and you taught us what was important in life. I was the luckiest girl to grow up with such a loving family. I don't know if I've ever told you how grateful I am for all you did for me. When we were facing being locked up by the government, you kept us calm. Ray feels terrible for bringing Norman and me over to Japan. He didn't expect the entire country would fall into a famine. Whatever food we have each day, I make sure Norman gets what he needs. You know I am strong. You made me that way. I hope help comes soon. Your loving daughter.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
That was, and then what a miracle. And I truly, I've talked to doctors and everything about this. How she was able, when she got just a little bit of nutrition, to start nursing him again.
Yes.
After having gone through close to a year of not nursing him, how she was able to restart that, I don't know.
That's an amazing story. And the fact that she's still alive at 101 and such
That's right.
malnutrition through most of her life. I mean, it's incredible
Right.
until she came back to America.
They ever I didn't realize that the feeling when she got over there was such resentment that he had married an American.
Exactly.
Yes. And it never really got better for her over there, did it?
It never really did.
For the most part?
She did make friends with one or two people around there, but no, it really never. And I think some of his family came around.
Oh,
You know, some of the members of his family.
good.
But once again, she had no bitterness.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And once they finally settled and he was able to get back to America, they visited Japan often. They would go every year.
Wow.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Well, now he
went a
come
lot.
from a wealthy family, as I recall. And now, did he lose the money? Because when he went back there, it sounded like.
Well, that's an interesting story all its own, because a lot of people are aware that General Macarthur was put in charge of Japan at the end of the war. And he did a lot of great things. He gave women the vote. He put in a constitution for them. Women couldn't even own property at that point. He put in that women could own property. He did a lot of really wonderful things. He cleaned up their schools that were all, awful. They did so much propaganda in their schools. He cleaned all that up.
Wow.
But one of the things he did that Jan is still a little bit upset about this, and it's hard to understand, was they did a forced takeover of the land. And I think what happened was a lot of the landowners in Japan were blamed, rightly or wrongly, I don't know, by the Japanese people for promoting war, because there was so little land in Japan. They wanted to conquer China.
Mhm.
They already had conquered Korea, and so they wanted more land, and so they were blamed for the aggression of the Japanese military. I don't know if it's true or not, but anyway, so they used the excuse they were going to take the land from these people and give it to their tenant farmers, that it was going to improve production, which it didn't. It actually didn't. Production declined. And so when faced with this, Jan's husband decided to give the majority of the land to family members.
Mhm.
And you could only keep, it's hard for me to compare. They use the term hectares or whatever, and I don't know how that compares to our land of
Acres, you mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure how it all works, but he was able to keep his house and a little bit of the land. So I'm guessing a couple acres, but I really don't know for sure. But he gave the rest to family members rather than have the government take it.
And how did that work out? Did that?
I guess it worked out fine. And then, you were asking about later. So when he finally got permission to return to America, he
I meant
he sold the balance of it, and he left all the money in Japan. He never brought it to America, and they used that money then for all the trips back to Japan.
Didn't he have a tough time getting approval to come back to America?
Oh yes.
Oh, that's right.
Very much so. In fact, Jan came back in 1953, and he didn't get back until 1961. They thought it might be a few months, and it was like 8 years.
Wow.
Well,
So there she was alone again with a child.
That's right. And she had a teenager at that point, right?
And she's not bitter at all. I can't imagine what she went through.
She just isn't. She just isn't. So they never were told why. And it was probably either his activities, going back to getting sent to the immigrant service.
Yeah.
But that's a possibility. But probably more likely was he had tuberculosis.
Right.
And so it was in remission. But you could see how the government might be hesitant at that point. They didn't want, of course, expose Americans.
Right.
Jan and her son, when they take the tuberculosis test, they always turn out positive.
Oh.
But they never developed it as a disease themselves.
Huh.
So they must have just gotten enough. They had the immunity to it. I'm not sure how that works, but he clearly struggled with it. It did not take his life though, and it never did reappear once he was in America. So that was good.
Yeah. Well, tell us so many moving parts, but when her family, when they were released, when the war was over and they could leave the camps, her family was set to go to Chicago. A number of them were going to Chicago and made decisions to go there. But tell us about their being on the train and stopping off at St. Louis. I love that story.
Isn't that great? And that's another story I've known for 40 years. And at this point, it's almost legend because it's hard to get details on it. But the train, the government, the War Relocation Authority, they put them on the train. I think they gave them maybe $25. And they said their jobs in Chicago. We have people there lined up to help you find employment. And truly, those people, were a little bit scared that Chicago was going to be cold.
I would imagine, yes.
But because they were surprised how cold it got in Arkansas, right? But anyway, so somebody with the War Relocation Authority contacted someone in St. Louis, and I think it was the Red Cross, but I'm not even sure of that. And this lady put out the word that these trains were coming up, and there was hundreds of people on there. I don't know how many, but there were definitely hundreds, if not thousands. And So they wanted to, they had a layover in St. Louis. They knew that they hadn't had anything to eat. And so they made sandwiches, they had chocolates, and they, homemade sign, welcome.
Yes.
They pulled into the St. Louis train station. They were floored. They were absolutely floored. I mean, you can imagine after years of being in the camps and being hated, they were petrified that it would still be they would still be resented. They didn't know what to expect. And so here were these nice people there extending the hand of friendship and saying, if you want to stay here, we'll try and help you find jobs. And so the whole entire train that had tickets to they all stayed. And there are some really famous people that were on that train. For example, there was a young fellow, I would say, maybe 10 years old or younger, who became a very well-known architect. They went on and did great things. Let's put it that way. Lawyers and so forth. Yeah.
That's such a,
And her husband became the gardener for Anheuser-Busch. Is that correct?
That's right. So once he came, all he really had ever known all his life, he had taken an interest in their gardens, and he tried to restore their gardens that were destroyed from the bomb, of course. And he read up on it. It was his passion. And when I say gardening, their gardening is different from ours. To me anyway, like when I look at a beautiful garden, I like to see pretty flowers, and I like this one, and I know a little bit about it. But for them, it's a lot of symbolism.
Oh.
This means peace. This means love. This means it's a whole lot of water and I am no expert at it, other than I know that it's much more than just the beauty that I look at with gardening. And so for him to study it all and understand that, and yes, he was a gardener then for Gussie Busch, who was, the big beer tycoon.
Anheuser-Busch, of the Anheuser-Busch.
Yeah.
Well,
And,
so he came back and did he, when Ray came back from Japan, did they live with her family for a while with Norman, the son, and Janet?
Yes, they had a little house. And the four of them then, yes, they lived together because at that point, Jan's mother was deceased.
That's right, yeah.
And then they saved up and they kind of bought like your typical suburban home.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it's in a nice suburbia area here called Manchester. And it was a nice ranch home on a big lot that Kay could have a big garden. Actually had a vegetable garden then too. And so and then he ran his landscape business out of that home. And I think they moved into that house. I want to say the later 60s. And she was in that house all the way until 2016.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Wow. What was interesting, to digress another time, was when the family was in Arkansas at the camp, Janet's father started a garden. And
yes.
So the men, yeah.
Oh, big gardens down there. Definitely.
Yeah.
And yes, and they grew a ton of vegetables and everything.
Yes, that's right.
They grew their own food because they didn't like what the army was, or basically the army was serving them. Beans and pork, was it?
Yeah, right. And spam.
Spam.
That's right.
I
had an uncle in World War II. He will never touch spam again.
yeah, there you go. But, to get back to your point about Jan's diet, the interesting thing is growing up, even though she was poor, they always had, where they lived, there was such rich soil. They had orchards and all kinds of things. So really growing up, even though she grew up poor, she had an excellent diet. Really only that year or two in Japan that she had a poor diet. And which she ended up losing her teeth and everything.
Yeah, she lost her teeth, didn't she?
Yeah. And I think probably that part of that was, going back to nursing when she had no energy and so forth. It just zapped her calcium, I guess you would say.
Now, when she came back, oh, excuse me, go on.
No, that was all. Go ahead.
When she came back to America, she found a job relatively quickly, which was
Yes,
no
she did.
surprise. Yeah.
And that tells you, and of course you can kind of read between the lines between that and also how she was the block manager and so forth. She's extremely intelligent.
Yes.
And so she went to the employment agency and took some exams and she aced them.
Oh,
And
I believe it.
able to place her immediately.
Oh.
Yeah, she's very intelligent.
Wow.
And you it's amazing because you get so inside her head, it's wonderful, that you forget that it isn't Janet writing the book herself.
Thank you. That's what we want.
Oh, you absolutely do. It's yeah, and in her
I do. I feel like I know her so well.
Yeah.
You know, we had a moment. It's hard for me to tell this story. I'll do my best, but when she had moved up to Chicago, her son moved her up to Chicago, and I was up visiting her, and we sat down and we'd gone out to lunch or something, and all of a sudden there were tears coming down her face, and she said, "You know, Judy," she said, "when you started the project," she said, "I kept telling myself, oh, she won't really finish. She won't really do this."
Oh.
And she said, "Then you read me the first chapter." And she said, I didn't want you to see, but she said, I hung up the phone. I bawled my eyes out.
Oh.
And she said, and then you kept going. And she said, I had myself convinced you'd never really finish. And you did.
Mm-hmm.
So I cried again. And so we had a moment then where we cried our eyes out.
Oh.
And so we have had some really the most intimate moments you can imagine. It's hard to talk about it. You know, it's something.
Oh.
I'll share with you a little story that to me tells so much. And this was in 2019. And I was up there, it was Labor Day. Actually, 2018 Labor Day, because that was, well, it doesn't matter. It was in that vicinity, we'll say, in that range. And so she was in a nursing home, which I didn't think she belonged there. But anyway, she was in a nursing home. And so I was going to take her to lunch. And there was a brand new nature park reserve across the road from her nursing home that had just opened. And I kind of been watching it every time I came in town. And it was finally open. And it looked like at the back of the parking lot, there was a pathway. And so I was really excited to take her to the park. And so I got to pick her up that morning, and it was pouring down rain. So discouraged. So I said, Jan, would you mind if we do a little bit of an early lunch and we'll see if the rain stops? So sure enough, the rain stopped. We went and had our lunch. And another kind of cute little thing there, the man that was waiting on us, he comes to our table and he says, we serve Pepsi products. And she says, oh, does that sound good? And I knew she didn't have any dietary restrictions. And so he said, sure, I'll bring you a Pepsi. And so she's drinking the Pepsi and she said, oh, I haven't had one of these in the longest time. And it's tasted so good to her. And so then, of course, we're getting ready to leave and the man brings her one to go, you know. So it stopped raining, thankfully. And we get to the nature reserve. And I was so excited. And I had strict instructions. She had to use a wheelchair, even though she could walk, but they didn't want her to fall down. So I was respectful of all the rules. So I said, Jan, you're going to have to hop in the wheelchair. And then let's have a look here at this park. So I started to push her through the parking lot, and we get to the pathway, and it's crushed gravel. Oh, and so I was at that point after the rain, it was muggy hot, and so I started pushing her. And I said, Jan, I'm not sure how far I'm going to be able to make this because, I mean, I was already sweating bullets, you know. And so we're going along and she's looking at this lovely park reserve, right? And she turns and says to me, and this was such a moment to me, I'll never forget. And she said, "Isn't it lovely how the rain washed all the dust off the leaves?" This is a
Wow.
99-year-old person.
Mhm.
It was the most beautiful. It was like I just froze. I couldn't. It was. I don't even know if I would have thought to say that. Do you know what I'm saying? You know, you might say, "Oh, isn't it pretty out? It's lovely. Look at all the trees." But she says, "The rain washed the dust off the leaves." It was, that just tells you a little bit about her, what an insightful, beautiful person she is.
Yes.
And what comes through so also in the book is her kindness. She just
Yes.
radiated kindness.
I was afraid I wouldn't believe it. I really was worried about that.
Say both Judys.
Not exaggerated in any way. It's not.
Yeah.
Both Judys. I want to turn to what you did once you finished the manuscript. We have a few minutes left. I'd like to talk about the experience of getting it published. What did you do?
Well, I did hire, I had several editors that helped me. One of all things was a teacher that had my son had been in school with, that I really respected, this English teacher, and a couple other people who gave me their insights, which I really appreciated. And then I started sending out query letters. I did the whole, you know, I went and looked up all about all the agents, and my cousin that I had mentioned previously, his words were, "Get yourself an agent." So I quickly learned that when you're a nobody, you're a nobody, you're a nobody. And I went to a conference. It was called the Missouri Writers Conference. And I just listened and talked to everybody I could. And, you know, literally one evening at the bar in the hotel, I talked to a couple of publishers that had representatives there. And I met this one person, her name's Jennifer, and we kind of connected and told her about my project. She said, "Send it over." So I did. And that was in May, April, May. And literally I kept in touch with her and a couple others and got nowhere. But the following spring, so it was close to a year, she wrote me back and she said, "I'm finally catching up and I'm reading your book and I love it."
Oh.
Script. I guess at that point it was a manuscript, right? And so then we were off to the races.
Oh.
Judy, we're going to have to wrap this up. Where you finally found Open Books Press, as I know, because it was my publisher for my first book as well. But we're going to have to say goodbye. We didn't get into the book launch. We didn't get into the movie and the screenwriting that you're going through. We'll have to have you back. That's all I can say.
I can't tell you how much I'm enjoying this.
Well, I can tell, and I'm enjoying it as well.
Me too.
And there's
You're
so many more
backstories.
Well, thank you. There's so many more backstories. Like her youth is fascinating, and you know, the stories about how she ran into the racism in Arkansas is interesting.
Yeah.
And
but we have to run. Judy, do you have any final words? I'm talking to Judy one.
Oh gosh, yes. Thank you, Judy. Yes, I have a quote from Lloyd Alexander. "Keep reading. It's one of the most marvelous adventures anyone can have." Read that.
Amen to that.
Fabulous.
Read The Block Manager.
Thank you.
Racism is a grown-up disease, and we should stop using our kids to spread it. And what's important about that, it was said by Ruby Bridges, and she's the woman, she was the first African-American child to desegregate an all-white school in Louisiana in 1960, and she was the subject of that famous 1964 Norman Rockwell painting.
Oh, wow.
I'll end with that. Charlie Redner, I'll see you next time.
Judy Saxon, thanks. Bye.